Hi, thanks for stopping by at the eCave today. This is another update on the first PS2 Model 3206 machine I began some while ago. If you're interested in that update, well, why not join me in the eCave? Well, thanks for coming into the eCave today. It's been a holiday season, so I hope you had a good break over Christmas and New Year. At least I have, although it's been a bit wet and hot here down under. But anyway, today is a bit of an update on the first IBM PS2 Model 3206 machine, which has given me no end of trouble. When I did the last update, I had ordered a crystal, a 25 megahertz crystal, and I actually received the new crystals probably in the early December, but given the holiday break, I haven't gotten to it until now. So in this episode, I'll be taking you through what's happened since then. I've actually put in the crystal, and yes, you will see what comes next. Now, I'll let you know I haven't filmed everything. I've just put it all together as a story for you, so you get a better understanding of what's happened. As I mentioned later on, filming everything and all the hours I spent on this would turn into a very, very long series. But anyway, let's start with the new crystal and what it looks like and if it will match the old one. As you can see here, the new crystal is pretty much identical to the old one, so hopefully it does the job. I began by removing the old crystal, which turned out to be the easy part. Now, using a desoldering gun, I took out the legs. I then had to fit the crystal and bend the legs so it would fit into the board. I then used a bit of tape to hold it down while soldering it back in. However, when it came to removing the ground strap, which is soldered across the crystal housing, it got a lot harder. Both the legs of the ground strap are soldered into the ground plane of the motherboard. This meant that it absorbed a lot of the heat from the desoldering gun, and it became very difficult to clear the holes once the wires were out. Now, as you can see, the new crystal is installed, but due to the ground plane, I somehow managed to damage one of the traces with a desoldering gun. Nothing a bit of a botch wire can't fix, though. Now, as you can see from the schematic, both the crystals feed the IBM proprietary VGA Jungle chip. The 28 megahertz goes into pin 8 and the 25 megahertz goes into pin 136. When I was probing the crystal the last time, I did realize the schematic diagram of the crystal circuit wasn't correct. So I did reverse engineer both the crystal oscillator circuits and knocked it up in KiCad. As you see in the KiCad circuit diagram, the crystal output will pass through two hex inverters and then through a buffer gate and then back into the VGA Jungle IC. They're pretty identical, both of them. So after installing the new crystal, I was very keen to check the voltage levels of the 25 MHz clock to see if anything had changed. As you saw in episode 23, the voltage level of the 25 MHz clock crystal was just over 2 volts peak to peak, while the voltage level of the 28 MHz clock crystal was about 6 volts peak to peak. Yeah, I'll link to episode 23 below. Now, as you can see here, the voltage levels on the 25 MHz clock crystal have now doubled and are just over 4 volts with the new crystal. That's a lot better. But I also probed the levels of both the clock signals as they entered the VGA Jungle IC, and as you can see, they are quite similar to each other, so that appears to have fixed the problems with my voltage levels of the crystal. But did that change anything when I powered on the board to boot it up? Well, sadly no, although it did behave a bit differently though. As I've shown in episode 23, when it powered on, it almost always got stuck on error code 04 when using the Parallel Port Diagnostic port adapter. And this time around, though, it did also get stuck on error code 04, but then it would occasionally go to error code 0F and sometimes error code 10. This of course meant that although the 25 MHz crystal was bad, it certainly didn't fix the problem. I then spent hours trying to work out what was causing this issue, but of course I didn't film all my attempts in the process. Otherwise, this would have been the longest TV series on electronic fault finding ever. But when I was checking all the input signals on the VLSI memory controller chip, I did notice one signal that didn't look right. The memory controller chip is marked as ZM3 on the board, and it's one of the VLSI chipsets, i.e. VLA2C102A. What drew me to it was the fact that it controls the memory access. One of the output signals is pin 82, which drives the output enable on the BIOS ROM IC. When probing that pin on the BIOS ROM and the board hangs on error code 4, this signal disappears. So I was just wondering, is there any input on this VLSI chip that is bad or doesn't look right? Now this eventually led me to 3 input lines on this IC which controls the memory map used. The 3 lines are called RAM cell 0, RAM cell 1 and RAM cell 2. The datasheet shows that for the model 3286, those 3 inputs should be grounded all the time. As you see here, it shows that with all pins grounded, it uses a memory map which allows for up to 4 megabytes of memory on the motherboard. That's what 18 times 256K means. The datasheet also says that these inputs should be tied to VDD, which is plus 5 volts, or VCC, which is ground, depending on your configuration. On this motherboard, that's not the case. All 3 come from an IC marked ZM31. It appears to be an IC made by Oki Electric Industry for IBM. I can't find any datasheets for it, but if you know more, please let me know in the comments. If you Google the part number, it appears to be available from some sources, but who knows what that means when you actually try. Anyway, what I found was the fact that when the board was frozen on error code 04, the RAM cell 2 input to the VLSI memory controller chip on pin 16 was high instead of low. Now if it's high, as you can see, it assumes the memory map used allows for 16 megabytes onboard memory. And that's not correct for sure. I probed this a few times and it was pretty consistent. Well, I decided to inspect and subsequently resolder the pin on the VLSI memory controller chip, because that seemed to be the area where it was going high. Now, under the microscope, I couldn't see anything wrong with the pin, but after resoldering the pin, what happens? The board boots, and it boots all the time. No more 04 errors. But is it good? No, it's not all good. Most of the time it boots normally. However, it does have a tendency to hang at random stages after the memory test count. Even worse, something's happened to the diskette drive interface, because the motherboard can't boot into a diskette. I know the diskette drive is fine because I've tested it in the other PS2 machine. So first let me show you how it fails to boot the diskette and just drops into ROM basic. As you see, there's no light or indication on the diskette drive. It's simply like it's dead. Although once the ROM basic is invoked, it seems to be fine. You can run basic programs fine. Then I had to brainwave to install the XT IDE Compact Flash card onto the motherboard and try to boot into PC DOS 7. I copied all the contents of the Model 30 startup diskette into a folder on the Compact Flash card, hoping I could run the setup from there. I had tried it on the other working Model 30, and when I did it that way, it worked fine, even invoked from DOS. However, when I tried it on this motherboard, it booted into PC DOS 7, and then when I finally invoked the setup program after remembering the name of the folder, it did come up, but then simply froze. So, one step forward, 2 steps backwards. Well, sadly, this motherboard has come to an end, at least for now. I don't know if I can actually resurrect it. I haven't given up all hope, but I really want to get this machine running. I don't want to have an empty case. So I've taken the decision to order a new second-hand motherboard, which I probably won't get until February. But given the fact that I've spent hours on this motherboard, or days actually, trying to work out what's wrong with it. Spending more time on it might not be advisable. Now it is here, as you probably noticed, and it is booting, but sadly tends to hang, and obviously something's happened to the diskette drive as well, as I mentioned. But when the new motherboard comes, I'll probably test it and put it into the case. That means I'll have two later versions of PS2 Model 30s, 286. So when the next episode comes, I'm not going to spend it on that. You probably had enough of these PS2 286s, but I will probably do one on the third PS2 286, which is the earliest version of it. I do have one which has a different planar or motherboard. So I might give you a quick overview of that and see if that works. Hopefully it does. Once that is finished, I'll proceed to the next PS2. So until then, thanks for stepping into the eCave today, and I'll see you next time.